This is a model of the generator, which is a solution finding method that I have developed over the past 15 years. It kind of looks like a laser gun, doesn't it? And what does a laser gun need? A laser gun needs an energy source that you can direct at a target. If you want to solve something, you need to be prepared to do so. So here we start with a problem statement about an issue that we want to address, and finally end up with plans that we can execute to find effective and long-lasting solutions rather than the band-aid solutions that our societies are so prone to pursuing. There are many experiences, successes, and failures that have gone into the development of this model. It looks complex, but it is actually a simpler version of several earlier iterations. How do we solve our problems? People often look to our politicians or other people to solve our problems. Others look to technologies. Some people think that we suffer from a lack of information. People put together their solutions to problems while ignoring the perspectives and inputs of other people, especially those they don't agree with. So the GSP theory and the generator model try to break past these realities of life. We're dealing with the problems of society here. So here, and just using the tools of science to solve them won't cut it. We shouldn't just indulge fear-driven action either. When you're dealing with human problems, there are a lot of factors involved. There's the messiness of why people do things and why they don't do things. You have to deal with common behaviors, culture, and belief systems, and all the other ugliness that can take place. The generator model is patterned after the scientific method at the higher level philosophy, but is being used in a sociological arena. Opinions, values, human tendencies, and culture are considered, but quarantined is necessary to prevent them from stalling the generation of sound solutions. It uses a root cause approach to implementing its solutions. It also problem solves in a way that mimics the ways of the natural world. Whether you are dealing with something at the subatomic level or the interaction of planets in a galaxy, the natural world is always seeking to establish balance. It does this through a huge array of things that include destruction and creation. In the end, though, nature is always striving towards balance. In addition, the generator model seeks to have us take collective responsibility for the solutions we develop and hopes for solidarity instead of divisiveness in our approach to problems. As you can see, there are several pieces here. When I was coming up with the model, I actually wanted it to be digital so that I could use animations to illustrate how it is supposed to work. I am actually working on another entry which may bring that more to light. The two plastic pieces here and the wooden base are not part of the model. Everything else represents a role in the use of the generator. There is one piece that is not shown here. Those are the cardinal cautions. The cardinal cautions are like traffic lights. They are present for the purpose of guiding our movements while operating tools that we have developed, in this case automobiles. They remind us to slow down when we can turn to a different course, and generally keep us safe. They help us to communicate potential hazards to each other. The cardinal cautions are reminders of human behaviors and tendencies that can influence how effective our solutions become. I've already covered some of the cardinal cautions. The first one was in Sad But True, which covers our frenetic life and the term that I call busyness. The second one was in Empty Causes, which covered the compulsion to mislead, control, or hurt others to promote a cause. Next, in Room Without a Window, I talked about conspiracy theories and what I call the blame game. In Loki, I talked about the human frailties. These are all reminders about the way people can behave and are meant to be revisited often during the use of the generator. One cardinal caution that I'd like to point out in this entry is the entry that I call monster, which comes much later in the line of entry prisms and of prism entries. This one has to do with one of the key factors that forged the GSP theory. Human societies have a tendency to allow once good-intentioned ideas to morph into our greatest prisms. In Monster, I'll be discussing how we'll factor in techniques to prevent the GSP theory from also becoming something that can be abused and turned against society when it was originally intended to help it. The generator has built-in mechanisms to help prevent the model from becoming a new well of dogma. Back to the model. Think back to your days when you were in primary school and you were learning about how to use the scientific method. So what are the steps of the scientific method? 1, ask a question. 2, do background research, construct a hypothesis. 4, test your hypothesis by doing an experiment. Analyze your data and draw a conclusion. That's step 5. And step 6 is communicate your results. In the scientific method, you ask a question. With the generator model, we make a problem statement, ask why it is present, and how we can solve it. Several steps of the generator model are equivalent to step 2 of the scientific method, which is do background research. We spend our time collecting information and data to prepare ourselves to solve the problem. After making a problem statement, the generator model takes us through a series of exercises to collect information about the problem and where we think it came from. We start to separate fact from fiction. We take a look at how people behave both positively and negatively. The generator model relies on a set of constants and variables. Our negative human behaviors are one of the first constants that we cover. These are things like self-interest, apathy, ignorance, collective behavior, fear, alienation, and destructive behavior. It considers our positive behaviors as constant. These are things like our interest in freedom and of the group, of the individual and of the group, the desire to help others without the presence of an immediate danger, caring for the welfare of the less fortunate, empathy, and hope. The third group of constants is our human requirements, what we are instinctually defending when in advocacy for a particular course of action, whether we realize it or not. At the basic level, these needs are access to food, water, shelter, and the capacity to protect ourselves. In more complex society, this list of requirements gets larger, more interdependent, and more difficult to manage since large societies expand the breakdown of labor to get things done. The review of these subjects is preferably done in a forum with representation from groups with different views, with experts in the subject matter present. The information collection relies on the classic who, what, when, where, why, and how questions that we are familiar with. We have made an effort to hear out people's opinions. People have biases about what the problem is, who caused it, and who can solve it. In the steps of the generator, we consider the opinions, but will quarantine them from facts to later be used as cautionary material and when we are getting ready to prepare potential plans. All these efforts have been focused on constants to this point. The issue itself, which is represented by this first blue block here, the issue's history and details, which is this orange piece here, the human frailties and the human altruisms, and the human requirements. These are all knowledge barriers, which all these pieces represent here. Knowledge barriers are information, data, common knowledge, and opinions. Our treatment of this information can vary. We can hide from it or not learn from it. We can unintentionally set up obstacles to solutions. These behaviors all represent a barrier to finding effective sound and effective solution plans. Alongside the knowledge barriers are the opponent barriers. They can be constants or variables in the generator model. There are two types. The first are behaviors, culture, and norms that populations will follow. The other types are institutions, governments, nations, leaders, and other more physical barriers that will come to mind. These can include CEOs, the IRS, and dictatorial regimes like North Korea. I am currently working on establishing a picture of the knowledge barriers. Recall that this is most like step 2 of the scientific method, where we make background research on the problem. The first piece, this one right here, is the problem statement. The colored discs represent the knowledge barriers. The first one is the issues and data related to the problem. The next is the human frailties. The next is the human altruisms, human requirements. And then the next one is the GSP characteristics. And this final one is what I call the 3 pillars. I'll be talking about these last 2 in a bit. Here I'm going to go a little off track and take a long step back to a more global, general viewpoint of the GSP theory. The GSP theory is heavily influenced by the concept of thought worlds. When humanity started out, we were in small tribes. In order to make sense of their place in this world, they developed religions and ways of thinking to coordinate their group behavior in order to interact with each other and survive. Humans used religion to shape the architecture of their societal organizations for most of history. Belief in one or more gods, the use of rituals and customs, and assignment of special tasks to certain members were used to enforce the authority of those religions. The GSP theory claims that the use of theological thought worlds has come to be challenged by another type of thought world. That is the scientific or rationalistic thought world. It began to form about 500 years ago in postmodern, post-Middle Ages Europe. There are other societies around the world that have established departures from theological thought worlds, such as China and Confucianism. But the GSP theory is focused on the particular scientific thought world that grew in response to the abuses of the Middle Ages, the Inquisition, and other activities of that time period. The GSP theory is based in the idea that neither the theological or scientific thought worlds are entirely correct for us. They are also capable of living side by side. Unfortunately, we experience the persuasion of groups that believe only one or the other is what we need. The GSP theory's stance is that both can contribute to a healthy society. How well can we align our proposed plans with meeting our core human requirements? That is one of the primary purposes of this generator model in using the philosophy of the GSP theory. The past 500 years has seen an intense struggle between the religious thought world and the scientific thought world. There's been a lot of death and strife as a result. The GSP theory's stance is that the scientific thought world currently holds the advantage and is driving out the influence of the religious thought world. We are seeing many signs that the religious thought world is still held to pretty strongly by some groups. Some of them are resorting to force and violent means to exert their viewpoints. Others are trying their best to compromise somehow. So what does all this talk of history and opposing thought worlds have to do with the things we've already talked about? Identifying a problem, gathering information about it, and somehow following the lead of the scientific method to solve it. The GSP theory claims that it is a scientific thought world that is in command. In order to be able to get a grasp on the problem and hope to establish problem resolutions that last, we need to understand the GSP's laws. We need to know the factors that are driving the problems. These laws that I'm mentioning are the GSP characteristics, this guy right here, part of the knowledge barriers. For a long time, I considered 7, but was able to pare it down to 6 recently. They are the rules of the GSP world. They were constructed starting in the 16th century in Europe. Like any laws that you can have in a thought world, the laws in the scientific thought world can be applied and have either positive or negative effects. What we were interested in is this: what rules do we follow, and do we do so blindly? Do we give enough consideration to the consequences, both near-term and long-term? The GSP theory claims that we have gone wild and given too much authority to the GSP characteristics. We have been indiscriminate in using them in any societal situation, whether they have a place or not. These laws were originally established for use in the scientific community for the purpose of organizing and engineering new processes and tools for us to use. Though the GSP characteristics have made great strides in establishing comfort, security, and more capacity for humans to survive, they have been twisted and misused through our human frailties by parties with key capacities for influence. Their aims were not necessarily in all our interests. Up to this point, we have learned a lot of things about the constants of our problem. The issue itself, the issue's history and details, human frailties, altruisms, and requirements. Now we take the position of comparing the variables to the problem. The first set is the GSP characteristics, the rules that structure and drive the GSP world. These GSP characteristics are standardization, specialization, objectivity, bureaucracy, efficiency, and measurement. Some of the entries that I've already put in the PRISM blog have covered some of these. These are great for tackling problems that are purely technical. Once you begin to use them for changes in the way that we interact with one another without regard to consequences, you can start making problems. The GSP characteristics are the main variables that are related to our problems. Again, we'll all engage the classic information probing to gather information. The who, what, when, where, why, and how questions. We compare the information collected so far to how the GSP characteristics might be interacting with what we've learned. It will give us insight into where things have been going wrong and where the characteristics have been overreaching. Don't use up all your energy on the peripherals, which is the opponent barrier. We focus on this all the time. Use the least amount of effort to find solutions that will last. Rather than spinning our wheels and spending all our energy on perceived enemies, my concept tells us to go to the source in tackling problems. The basic level includes the characteristics and the pillars. Like the characteristics, the pillars are pivotal in the GSP theory. They are institutions, our most foundational institutions. I've identified 3 core institutions that will be in place no matter how large the society is. Those are education, communication, and engineering. People will understand what I mean by the institutions of communication and education. But how about engineering? Engineering is the application of tools and rational thoughts to solve problems. It is not limited to the output of well-educated professionals like common culture would have us believe. Engineering can be done by a range of professions. It comes down to using natural laws to produce tools that include mechanical devices, structures, software, language, processes, and procedures. You don't have to have a degree in order to create these. In the GSP theory, you can't get more basic than the 3 pillars. They are the core institutions that you want to direct your solutions towards if you hope to enact lasting changes that trigger even more change to our benefit. This brings me full circle to a concept I mentioned earlier. that the three pillars may act as either knowledge barriers or opponent barriers. So far, I've been treating them as knowledge barriers. We've done a lot of review that collects an awareness of the knowledge barriers. We are preparing ourselves to now pass through an awareness of the opponent barriers, which are represented by the tin cylinder in the model. You have to pass the opponent barriers, acknowledge but not engage them, and carry your cache of knowledge that you've gotten here safely to the other side, where you can establish plans. Be reminded of what the knowledge barriers and opponent barriers are. Knowledge barriers constitute the facts surrounding the problem, statement, its history, and its effects. The way humans behave are requirements for survival, and the core nature of the characteristics in the pillars are other knowledge barriers. This information either allows or prevents us from seeing the problem for what it is in the scientific thought world as driven by rationalism. Opponent barriers are most notably variable. They have not been static for all of human history and depend on culture, our goals, and how we have structured our society. They are what we typically point at when identifying what has caused a problem. They are leaders, institutions, organizations, nations, and other physical and tangible obstructions. The opponent barriers also include our perceptions of the past, present, and future, and their influence on our willingness to make positive changes. Remember my analogy from the beginning. The model has a semblance of a laser gun. All the knowledge barriers are represented by the colored discs, and the problem statement is represented by the wooden block at this end. We collect them up as a source of power, something that we can use to solve our problem. And then we have to confront the realities that there are players in this world that will try to prevent us from enacting solutions that will change our situation. It's the opponent barriers. We proceed to obtain mindfulness of the opponent barriers at play. Once we have this collected body of wisdom, the knowledge barriers and the opponent barriers combined, we can make plans that can be directed back through the model at the problem statement. This is done again by using the three pillars. The three pillars were involved when determining the knowledge and opponent barriers. Now here's the prime ingredient of the generator as produced by the GSP theory. These three pillars need to be in place for us to use tools to meet our human requirements. You can't just discard them, even if they are causing the problem. Remember that it's communication, education, and engineering, the most basic institutions we have. No, they are both problem and solution. They may not always be the problem, but will always be a part of the solution. The GSP theory directs the generator to utilize the three pillars and come up with action plans that can be used against the problem. The pillars are represented by these three discs at the other end of the model. The rest of what we perceive to be problematic will begin to be resolved by taking this approach. In turn, we will be able to direct our attention to other significant institutions and use the generator model against them as well. The last steps of the generator model are not founded in the scientific method, but still have some similarities. The GSP theory and the last steps weren't developed as just a rationalistic attempt to solve problems. They come from the hope that we can break the cycle of repeating our mistakes. We want to track and follow our plans after implementation. We should monitor them for whether the intent of the plan is going astray and producing unintended consequences. We should want to minimize these. This is in response to our tendency to be disinterested in spending time on understanding the potential consequences of our actions. So the generator model forms a concept of what the problem is and how you should tackle it. Then you come up with testable predictions, then you begin to produce results. It enters a cycle similar to within the scientific method, which asks us to analyze and refine, alter, or expand the hypothesis. We make adjustments and potentially even discard pieces of the plan if they are not working. I made several tries at how to encompass the scope of this entry. I spent a lot of time trying to make it short and engaging as I could. I'm still not sure the product accomplished that. I was really pressed for the time to even work on it. I hope I can get a break for that. I always try to remember that the credit should really go to the fact that I have spent this much effort to go out of my way and sacrifice my own interest to work on something that will be a benefit to those I know and those I don't. How many people do you know who would go beyond just aligning themselves with those they agree with and blaming certain parties for our problems, and strive to develop actual solutions that could help us? After this entry, I will be covering more topics to get to a 2/3 of the way point that will then pause for another less in-depth recap. There I will focus less on the theory of the generator model and more on its use in real-life settings.